Good morning. First, our morning bulletin on the penny farthing site in False Creek, where for almost a couple of weeks now there have been masses of protesters from the building trades and from Solidarity. This morning all is pretty quiet. No sign of any union leaders. Solidarity banners. And of course the union leaders, some of them are going to be in the Supreme Court in front of Chief Justice Alan McKay at 9:45 this morning, as Berkoff's counsel will be asking for criminal contempt citations against those who have ignored the Labour Board order filed with the Supreme Court ordering that the site be cleared because the non-union contract given to Berkoff is legal, proper and all above board after the Labour Board hearings. We'll report if anything happens from the Supreme Court hearing before 10:30, and of course the noon news will have the full details of what's happened this morning. And then, in a pleasant change of pace, we're going to go to Ambleside and Tiddly Cove, where a number of worthy citizens are taking strong objection against a plan which they fear might commercialise Ambleside between 14th and 18th. Here's one of the antagonists to the council's plan.
In your worst fears, what do you see happening here?
I can see massive marinas going out there, possibly even buildings eventually going outside there, massive crowds of people with inadequate places for the cars to get into. They'll be parking up the streets here into domestic homes, and there'll be a whole change in the character of the municipality.
That's what he says, and Mark Schneider will have a full report, including the response from Mayor Derrick Humphreys of West Vancouver later in the programme. Now a serious topic. You all know the kerfuffle that has taken place in the United States since Reagan moved ahead very sharply to deregulate airlines, to cut fares, to allow almost unfettered competition. We know that Braniff went belly up. We know that Continental was in great trouble. Pay cuts all over the place. $150,000 a year pilots out on picket lines as they were being replaced by what we in this country called scabs. Not allowed here, allowed in the United States. Well, in Canada, Axworthy has set us on a course, Axworthy, not the guy in the PMO, the fellow from Winnipeg. Might even run for the leadership, God save us all. Axworthy has set us on a course of deregulation, and opening in Vancouver today are hearings of the Canadian Transport Commission. And you and I both have great concerns about, one, getting cheaper fares, two, getting safest possible service, and three, what's going to happen to the ailing Canadian airline industry. Maurice Kaufman is the public interest advocate representing thee and me, presumably, at these hearings, and will pick his brains on what he wants to see happen or what is liable to happen. Later in the program, too, we're going to have Dave Stupich, the final interview that I have in my dispersed series on those brave people who want to become leader of a Barrett-less NDP. And we'll be chatting up Dave Stupich in the program. But first, deregulation for Canadian Airlines with Maurice Kaufman after the break. First of all, I want to find out what Maurice Kaufman is precisely doing at these hearings. You're described as a public interest advocate. Does that mean you've been appointed by Axworthy or whoever to go for broke, to push his views that deregulation is a must and that wheelchair passengers must be, the attendance for wheelchair passengers must be carried for free across the country? Is that right?
No, I see my role as a little broader than that, Jack. Airline economics and regulation have always been an insider's game. They come in with their statistics, with their fancy computer models, and essentially keep the average person out of the ball game and keep it not in the back rooms, practically, but it's an insider's game.
Let's talk about the states for a minute, but you're acting for the public in this.
That's correct.
Public interest advocate.
That's correct.
Let's look south of the border. I can fly right now from Seattle to New York for $99, New York to Britain for $99, there and back for $400 American, right?
Right.
What's this doing to the established American airlines? Putting them into bankruptcy?
It's certainly putting the American air industry into turmoil, but it appears that the Americans aren't scared of turmoil. They appear to be an active, energetic people who basically take the attitude of let's do it, let's stand it on its head and see what happens. Canadians, on the other hand, appear to feel very comfortable with static. Some would say almost a dead situation, where everybody knows their place, where the rules are in place, and everybody feels comfortable.
We've been brought up in the faith that there is no room for competition, first of all, to Air Canada at all, and you know the fight the CPA had to get a competing line across the country.
That's right. And Wardair is now going through a similar fight.
Wardair, of course, is still on the outs. Is that correct?
Pretty well, but moving in, I suspect.
And we know, too, that safety will be greatly affected if we allow free-for-all competition among airlines.
Well, Jack, we don't know that. The opponents of deregulations raise that as a scare tactic, but we don't know as a fact that safety is impaired at all.
Has it shown in the United States that safety is impaired at all?
I don't believe that the statistics prove that, and I'm bringing up American witnesses in April to Ottawa, and I hope that they'll demonstrate that it's just a hysterical tactic.
Has it not shown, though, that airlines like Braniff, presumably a big, competent airline at one time, just went straight belly under?
Well, you say presumably. It's very hard to tell in a regulated environment who in fact is good and who isn't good, and that's the idea of competition, is to make sure that those who are running a tight ship and a lean ship are the ones that'll survive. As I say, the Americans don't feel uncomfortable with that. We, for some reason, do.
Well, let's look at Canada. If I phone up a travel agent today, that travel agent might have 10 different fares to 10 different places, subject to no government interference at the time I go to pick up my ticket. Is that correct?
That's right. In fact, you'll recall, Jack, that the triggering mechanism for these hearings was last summer when the airlines tried to introduce sales and the CTC disallowed them.
Now, as the CTC, have they still got the power to disallow deregulation?
Deregulation ultimately will have to be done through legislation. Yes, they're sitting in a fairly key position at the moment.
Yeah, but it's their say-so at the moment, unless and until the cabinet overrules them.
It's absolutely their say-so.
Why does it cost me more to fly to Whitehorse than it does to fly to Toronto? Discrimination against the West, quite obviously.
No, I think the airlines would argue that it's a question of density, and that's the fare that they put. I don't think it's discrimination against the West in the sense that in remote areas in Ontario you may find the same things.
But is it not true? I fly fairly regularly to Kamloops in that direction, and I have to pay $162 regular economy return, an excursion fare for $106. To Calgary costs me $280. I can fly to Toronto for less than that on a special seat.
That's right. If you book 14 days ahead of time, stay over a Saturday, and a large elephant happens to be crossing the Sahara at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
In other words, the conditions are impossible.
That's right.
What do you propose?
I'm hoping that we will loosen up this dead hand of rules and allow as much competition as possible in Canada in order to give benefits to the consumers and make sure the airlines are as competitive as possible, while at the same time making sure that things such as safety and such as service to small communities are maintained. I think we have a lot to learn from the American experience. We're very fortunate in that sense that they've, in essence, conducted an experiment for us. And whereas some of the airlines are running around saying, well, we shouldn't look at the Americans, it's completely different, and they list a whole bunch of differences, I don't think that's very wise.
Well, it is kind of wise. For instance, I can understand why I can fly for $30-odd from San Francisco to Los Angeles, because of the massive population commuting there.
That's right.
We can't support that here.
Well, that's the airline argument, but you see, then the issue becomes this. Why should the Vancouver, Toronto, or the Montreal, Ottawa passenger subsidize a remote community? The airlines argue that it's in the national interest to service remote communities, to which I say, if in fact it turns out that a People's Express, for example, doesn't come in and service that remote community for a reasonable cost, and it becomes a matter of national policy to service that community, then the nation ought to pay for it by way of direct subsidies. The advantages of that will be, first of all, we'll all know what it costs to fly there. Second of all, the decision making will be done by elected people rather than by airline executives. And thirdly, and most important, the decisions will take place in the open, where the people can see what's happening, instead of in the back, some corporate back room in an airline office.
You're saying that we'll say the fare to Calgary is out of line at $280, regular economy return.
I'm saying to you that we shouldn't say that ahead of time, that we should open up the market for competition and let the market decide what the appropriate price is. The American experience demonstrates that it'll probably drop.
Probably drop. But you might find that the suddenly overflying Kamloops are not going to go to Victoria any longer because it's totally uneconomic. And then somebody's got to apply for another subsidy.
That's right. That's right. But what I'm saying to you is that there is a subsidy inherent in the system right now, except you and I can't find out who's paying it, how much it is, and who's making the decisions.
So one of your principal attacks, therefore, will be to establish firm fares apart from firm competition in fares.
That's right. Let the competition set the price.
Get rid of all these fancy fancy special elephant crossing the street deals.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You see, American Express has come up here and has indicated certain routes that they would be prepared to come in and fly for equivalent prices to the United States. Now, I don't say let in an
People's Express?
People's Express, I'm sorry. Now, I'm not necessarily subscribing to the view that we should allow an American airline coming in here. What I am saying is give Canadian Capital Initiative a chance, open up the market for competition, and maybe some capital will assemble and we'll get Canadian equivalents of People's Express.
It says here from PWA that carriers cannot compete on an equal footing owing to the dominance of Air Canada. Is that right?
That's an argument that is not subscribed to by everybody. Bill Jordan, for example, who's a very respected economist, takes the view that if you open it up for competition, people will take care of Air Canada. That is, the competition will take care of them. But more importantly, we have to get rid of this trying to sort of guess ahead of time what is going to happen. If, in fact, the worst fears turn out, for example, and Air Canada becomes too dominant,
right,
they're still government-owned, steps can still be taken to restrict them, and we can deal with that later if experience proves that it's necessary. What I'm objecting to in principle is the way our system currently operates, which is we're constantly in the position of trying to make rules out of computer models rather than out of real-life experience.
Good. Going to invite calls this morning on this. Those of you who have problems booking fares and getting prices, or fly American. Do many people fly?
Well,
go down to
let me put it to you this way.
Buffalo, for instance?
Let me put it to you this way. We heard testimony from bus lines who have initiated a bus service a couple of years ago from the Royal York Hotel in Toronto, for example. Their destination is the Buffalo Airport. There are 300,000 people a year heading out of the Toronto area to the Buffalo Airport, and only 11,000 are destined for Buffalo. The other 290,000 people or so must be taking a plane somewhere, and they're not taking Canadian planes.
And taking the money out of the country, you might.
That's right.
More with Morris Kaufman, Public Interest Advocate. That's a new title, isn't it?
It is a new appointment, yes.
After the break. There was a stupid time, said he to Morris Kaufman, whereby you had to join a phony ski club 6 months in advance to get on a charter. Is that kind of nonsense gone now?
It's being reduced. There has been an acknowledgement in the last few years that people do want charters, do want to pre-book, and the rules are slowly being loosened up.
So Wardair, therefore, is an airline which operates on a non-scheduled basis.
That's
is that right?
That's right.
And they can fly with one person or 100 or 300.
That's right.
How are they doing? Do they want regular schedules across the country?
They would like to get into regular schedules. Their position, I believe, is that it is unfair. You see, the regular airlines are asking for the same kind of charter rules that Wardair has, while trying to keep Wardair out of scheduled service. And Wardair, I believe, is saying essentially, if you're going to give our advantages to the regularly scheduled airlines, then you have to give their advantages to us.
Well, they'd have to give free booze like Wardair does too, wouldn't they?
Well, you see, the free booze thing is just an indication of how absurd the system is. Because the airlines can't compete in prices, because the system is so dead, they compete in booze.
What about PWA? What do they want to do? Well, we missed a chance to buy them, and I think it's on the block now. I think Lougheed wants to get rid of it, doesn't he?
I think they've reduced their holdings to 15% recently.
15%?
Yeah, yeah.
And what about the services to North, like Whitehorse, where I was recently? They just must be subsidized, is that right?
They're being subsidized right now, allegedly, by the system. And again, what I'm saying to you is, I don't want to presume ahead of time that you need a subsidy. Let's see if they do, and then we'll deal with it.
Meanwhile, the whole thing might collapse. We might lose safety. We might lose service to various towns and places.
Look, some of the opponents play Chicken Little, the sky's falling if you allow this in. I don't accept that, and I don't think the statistics bear it out.
Kaufman is no Chicken Little. Go ahead to him.
Yes, good morning. I was
wondering,
down in the States, there's been a proliferation of smaller airline companies taking over the smaller runs. Wouldn't the same thing happen in Canada if they opened it up to regulation?
If you make the assumption that similarities exist enough so that the experience is transferable, the experience in the States is that some cities have lost jet service or have lost the service of the large airlines, but there is a tremendous and what they consider to be very healthy explosion of small airlines giving more frequent service with smaller planes to many of the small communities.
Good. The only thing I want to make quite sure they don't use Challengers on regular service.
Well, I can't guarantee the brand of jet.
Is that
I'm sure
a disloyal, unpatriotic remark?
Well, that's a problem with this issue. Everybody wraps themselves in the flag. I don't think consumers are interested in the flag. They're interested in good, cheap service.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Kaufman, I've worked in the travel industry for 25 years and have seen the changes over a number of years through the airline fares and the problems involved with the deregulation. We have been inundated with a multitude of different types of fares in the United States. We cannot come up with a decent fare even though we phone 10 airlines. You could have 3 or 4 travel agents working on the same fare, and we still cannot make order out of this mess.
You see, I think, with all due respect, the last word or second last word you use is the key to the whole thing. That's right. There won't be as much order. There will be what the opponents say will be chaos, but that's what competition is about. And I think that the travel agents will have a lot more work, but on the other hand, their services will be required and they'll be performing a real service for their customers rather than just stamping a ticket.
No, that's not exactly the point. We are being inundated through the multitude of fares in the United States that take hours and hours and hours of our time to locate fares to be competitive with other travel agents. A client can walk in from an agency down the street. He's already been quoted a fare. We could spend a day, which is non-profitable time.
Gee, that's free enterprise.
Time.
Isn't that free enterprise, Morris?
That's what it's about.
You have no sympathy with her at all, do you?
No, I'm sympathetic to her problem, but I suggest that that's what competition is about.
But it's going to get worse.
Okay, let me ask you a question, travel agent person. What about trying to get a fare in Canadian Airlines? That's easy, is it?
No, I'm talking about the whole
mess.
It's a mess, and it's going to get worse. And if we go like the American system, it is not going to get any better.
Thank you, ma'am. See, you haven't sold her at all. But her ox is liable to be gored.
That's the main problem with this issue. Somebody's ox is going to get gored.
It'll be the first thing the Liberals have done since they came into power in 1968. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm an airline employee. I can't say that I'm against deregulation. I'm for a controlled deregulation. I can't see just changing everything overnight is going to solve the problems. My second point is Air Canada and Nordair, which of course is owned by Air Canada, probably takes 60% of the Canadian market. As far as I'm concerned, the government can afford to drop the prices down to $1 each way until they drive all the competitors out of business. How can we compete in Canada with the government-owned airlines? We can't. No one can do that.
Let me deal with your first point first. I agree that you cannot pull the plug tomorrow morning. In fact, the Americans didn't even do that. The American Deregulation Act was passed in 1978, and it still has a year to run. It'll have to be a controlled, staged, and careful loosening up of the rules. To deal with your second point, and I was saying to Mr. Webster earlier in the conversation, I think that the Air Canada issue has to be monitored carefully. That is what's commonly referred to as the deep pocket issue. In other words, there are economists who don't agree and say that in a competitive environment, Air Canada will take its lumps. But if the worst happens and you find that competition does not work with the government airline, then remedial action would have to be taken.
But that could be too late. You could see your other airlines going under, and the only option will be, well, Air Canada will have to provide the service.
When you say it's too late, what you are in effect saying is that the staging has to be done very carefully so that you do not wind up in a situation that something major happens in a too late situation.
But in the initial situation, Air Canada would have the deep pocket advantage.
They will not have the deep pocket advantage at any time. What I'm saying is if it turns out that by virtue of their status in the market and their connection to government, they have an unfair advantage, then that would have to be remedied.
Good, thanks. Of course, this will produce all kinds of non-union airlines if it went the American way, wouldn't it? And that's sacrilege in this country, if not treason.
Well, as I said, Jack, we do introduce words like treason, sacrilege, and so on. Let the market take care of itself the same way it does in every other labor situation.
Both the fares and the hyperbole.
That's right.
Good one for this time in the morning, isn't it?
Not bad.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I think Mr. Kaufman has blinders on when it comes to deregulation. First of all, if he looks at the United States, he'll see Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, which has been forced out of the commercial aircraft manufacturing. He'll see McDonnell Douglas, who is only producing the Super 80 and has no future plans for aircraft. There's the Boeing Aircraft Company that's lobbying against for more regulation in the United States. Second of all, he has disregarded the Air Florida incident in the Potomac River, where the captain had 5 years total experience on jet equipment, which is unheard of in the industry. It's just not something that's done. Second of all, you look at Ward Air, and they already have the poorest labor relations in Canada and don't deal with their employees on a fair basis. They use policies that are out of the early 1900s, are very offensive. Finally, there's CP Air that is deregulated, and they thought that they could just buy a whole bunch of aircraft and all of a sudden run Air Canada out of the market, to only realize that Air Canada provides a competitive service and that they didn't erode Air Canada's market, and that has nothing to do with government intervention.
Good point. Don't go away. I'll let Mr. Kaufman respond to you after the break. Well, that airline guy was complaining about safety practices, perhaps at Air Florida, 5-year experience jet, Ward Air and their problems, and the 1900 labour relations, and CP Air, who didn't make the dent in Air Canada that they thought.
Well, let me deal with his points. First of all, it's not true that CPR is deregulated. They still operate under the regulatory regime the same way every other airline does in Canada. Secondly, as far as the American experience is, look, it's easy to pick 1, 2, or 3 examples. The issue is really the overall picture. And as far as my having blinders on, let me put it this way. My instructions are to represent the consumer and the general public. The unions have been at virtually every hearings putting forward their point of view. The airlines are putting forward their point of view. And those viewpoints, of course, are always represented. The difference in this hearing is that there's an outside interest also being represented.
Do the unions take a blanket approach against deregulation?
Strangely enough, I think it's fair to say at this stage of the hearings that there is one unanimous opinion, and that is, while they say no American-style deregulation, everybody seems to agree that the current system is too static and too dead and ought to be loosened up.
Go ahead from Vernon, BC.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
Just a consumer myself here. I'm with Mr. Kaufman with the Free Enterprise and Free Competition. I was just wondering, one point, I was wondering if most public is aware of it with the major airlines, if these highly publicized seats of 359, et cetera, to Hawaii. Approximately 10 seats out of a plane of 450 are of that rate, and all the others are regular fare.
Is that right?
Well, that's the problem. The problem is that while they do have some attractive seat sales, the conditions and the allocation of number of seats sometimes make them almost meaningless as far as the general consuming public is.
Oh, it's not the whole plane that's set for the seat sale at 349 to Hawaii.
Not with the regular scheduled airlines, although I'm not familiar with that particular Hawaii situation, so I don't want to comment
on a special seat sale, there might only be 10 seats in that.
I don't know whether it's 10 or 15, but it's certainly a restricted number.
So you want Free Enterprise, old boy?
Yes, sir.
And so does the other old boy in Vernon.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, please. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I got no numbers on my phone this morning. Where am I? 1, 2, 3. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, trying to clear up a piece of information that I've come across. Could you tell me, please, when did Air Canada start flying?
1920s,
was it not?
I believe it was in the 30s.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm just curious as some information. When CP, when they had their ocean line and they were world famous and they decided to branch off into the air industry, when they applied for a license to operate the commercial airline in Canada, is it true that they were refused by the government until the government set up their own Air Canada and then they accepted CP?
Do we want to go into history on that?
I'm sorry, I'm not aware of those details.
Yeah, you're way beyond us. Sorry, old boy.
Thanks very much.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Kaufman.
Good morning.
Morning.
I wish you all the luck in the world in dealing with Canadian officials on deregulation, and hope that your advocacy will produce at least some positive results.
I hope so, too.
I think that Air Canada and CP Air and others having to push DC-9s and other aircraft for an elevator ride to Kamloops and so on is a bit ridiculous. And having to put out alone some $1,200 or more per annum for myself just to visit my parents in Newfoundland, I think is a travesty.
$1,200 to visit your parents? I can believe it.
It's a bit ridiculous. And I hope that the free competitive spirit may come to Canada instead of staying in the States.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I have some information for your guest. If the guest realizes that our fares actually are lower than the States in terms of per mile, in the last quarter of '83, Air Canada passengers were paying 11.72 cents U.S. per mile. In contrast, United, Eastern, and Delta Airlines was 11.86 to 15.52. The difference is, of course, the great distances between Toronto and Vancouver, and I feel that if deregulation is implemented, places like Saskatoon, Regina, St. John's will lose air service, all jet air service. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Jack, let me say this. When you are comparing prices per mile, you have to ask questions like how many seats are available on the plane, how many days ahead of time do you have to book, or can you just walk into the airport and take the flight? Do you have to stay over a Saturday? Because for a businessman, for example, who has to go somewhere on a 2-day trip, it's fairly meaningless to tell him he's paying the same thing in the States if he has to book 14 days ahead of time and pay for an extra hotel for 2 more days over the weekend in order to get inside that cheap fare. So you have to be very careful of these per mile comparisons unless you look at the total picture.
So I could be paying full economy return as a businessman on a trip between here and Toronto, and sitting next to me is someone on a seat sale who, instead of paying my massive fare, is paying a much reduced fare.
Absolutely, except for one correction. He will not be sitting next to you. You'll be sitting in one special seat where the stewards and stewardesses know that you get a better meal and all the free booze you want. And the other fellow who is flying at a cheaper fare will be sitting in another part of the plane and paying for his liquor and getting a sandwich.
I didn't know that.
Well, you look the next time you're on a plane and you'll see how they switch.
I didn't know we had classes in economy.
Well, it's I wouldn't be too jealous of the classies, because for the 4 or whatever drinks they have, they're paying some $200 between here and Toronto.
Yeah. And first class, of course, is totally exorbitant.
That's right, but I wouldn't know.
Don't tell me that CTC people fly economy.
Well, I don't want to comment on the CTC commissioners. I'm appearing before them.
But I want you to compliment them on coming to Vancouver for the hearings. Many a time we have commissions across the country who don't know the West Coast exists.
I have to take some credit for that. I moved the motion asking them to go across the country and get out of Ottawa.
But they voted for it anyway. That's good. Do them good to get out of that dreadful climate in Ottawa. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Can I speak to Mr. Kaufman and ask him why, when a person goes on a emergency medical flight, they have to pay double the fare, and there were 6 vacant seats on the plane anyway?
There is currently an issue that is being handled both within these hearings, and the minister has indicated to the handicapped groups who also come into this problem, they may need an attendant, that is whether the person needs an attendant to go on the plane. They're fighting very hard and have appeared at the hearings on the position that there should be a one person, one fare. In other words, if a person has to have an attendant on the plane, then they ought to be able to take that attendant for one fare.
No, I don't mean that, Mr. Kaufman. I went to Britain because I had news that a relative was going to expire, and I had to pay $1,200 return instead of something like $500.
Well, you're comparing the advanced booking charter fare with the regular economy fare, ma'am.
Yes, that's right, Jack.
That's right.
And when they have vacant seats on the plane anyway, why don't they make some allowance?
Well, what she's actually saying is that all empty seats should be on the ABC fare.
But the fact of the matter is that the way it works at the moment, unless you fall within those what they call fences of advanced booking and so on, you cannot get into the cheaper fares. And that's the fundamental problem with the system.
This is what you're looking at right now.
That's right.
If we got fare cuts, the fare cuts would be, at least on certain flights, across the board.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the airlines agree an airline seat is the most perishable commodity there is. Once it leaves the ground, it's gone. And under the current regime, the airline cannot, say, for example, go on the radio at 3 o'clock this afternoon and say, we have 40 seats empty to Toronto, first come, first served for $100 or $50. What do they care? The seat's going to Toronto in any event. They can't do that.
Would you like to see that?
Absolutely.
Well, he's our public interest advocate at the CTC hearings, which are on in Vancouver at the Holiday Inn Harborside as of 9 o'clock this morning. For how long?
Until they finish taking the briefs. If anybody has something to say, they should just go down there and say their piece. Yes, sir.
And you will, if necessary, cross-question them?
No, there will not be cross-examination. Let them put in their brief so that their view is heard.
Good. My thanks to Morris Kaufman, public interest advocate. You're from Winnipeg, by the way.
That's right.
When are you moving to the coast permanently?
Oh, no, I'm staying in the middle of the country.
Okay. For the Canadian Transport Commission hearings on deregulation of our airlines. My thanks to Morris Kaufman. Next, Dave Stupich, after the break. Dave Stupich is the senior, I think, and the most distinguished member of the people who are running, distinguished person of the people who are running for the leadership of the NDP. But Dave Stupich is going on 62, or is it 63?
62 last December, Jack.
Dave Stupich has been a stalwart of the NDP for how many years?
1947 I joined the party, 37 years ago.
How long have you been in the House?
Been in the House since 1963 with a 3-year period when I was out and served as party president.
Right, and you've also been Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture, and anything else?
Finance critic. I was minister of only the two
Minister of two things. And here you go again, going after the leadership of the party. Do you really want the leadership, Dave Stupich, at the convention which comes up in what date?
May the 18th
May
to
the
20th.
Do you really want it?
Jack, I do, because I believe that I'm the one person that can lead us to victory in the next election, and I want to beat Bill Bennett.
Yeah, somebody in your party wants to be a bit. How would you describe yourself in the NDP spectrum? I always think of you as left of the NDP spectrum. Am I correct?
Well, Jack, was the land reserve left or right? I don't care whether it's left or right. I believe in party policy, and I don't choose to call it left or right or center or anything else. You bring the issue to me, and I'll tell you how I stand on it.
How do you stand on the penny farthing issue?
Well, that's a matter that has to be settled right now, not by politicians, not between you and me on this show, but between the trade unions and the employer. Now, the Labour Relations Board and the courts. That's where it is, and that's where it's going to be settled.
That's where it should be settled.
But remember, it all started with Premier Bennett's attitude and his desire with the July 7th budget and the legislation that came down to destroy the trade union movement in the province of British Columbia. Now, that's what's behind it all. It's Bennett's fault that this happened. A government that was elected to bring back sanity and some quietude to the province of British Columbia, and that had an excellent opportunity, because on July the 8th, when the voters, in May, after the election, when the voters woke up, the Socrats had won, even the NDPers accepted it. But that budget that came in July the 7th and the legislation upset the whole province and drew the attention of the whole country, internationally even. The Council of Churches drew the attention of everyone.
What legislation would you say indicated his desire to destroy the trade union movement?
Bills 2 and 3, the ones that were trying to take power away from the trade union movement, the continuing threats, and the threats are still there, to change the Labour Relations Act, legislation which employers and trade unions alike, although they both opposed it when Bill King brought it in, nevertheless, they both now believe that it's good legislation and should be left relatively intact.
Yeah, I can remember the first broadcast I did after I examined the bills of last summer, when I came back in September and said it was the first time in my reportorial career that I had ever seen legislation which destroyed a trade union contract. And that did happen in the case of the BCGEU.
It's after the Premier had promised that he wouldn't do that, promised during the election, and promised when he negotiated the agreement just about 15 months ago with the BCGEU that there would be no firings.
And you will concede that after the election, many NDPers were with what appeared to be the thrust of the Social Credit government.
They accepted the choice of the electorate. They didn't like it, but they accepted it had happened, and they were ready to wait until the next election. But this breathed new life into the party, into everyone in the province that was opposed to
Matter of fact, I thought it almost killed the party, because during that particular hiatus of Operation Solidarity's first kick at the cat, the NDP seemed to disappear.
Jack, that's
Solidarity took over.
That's a popular misconception, and you know better, and I think maybe you're asking that so that I can say so. But remember, in the House, the MLAs kept that session 24 hours a day, day after day, and we were prepared to sit there weekends. We kept things going in the House. We kept the issues before the public, so the Solidarity Coalition had an opportunity to do its work outside of the House. We couldn't keep the House going 24 hours a day and have some of our members out speaking around the province. There just aren't enough people to do that. We did our fight in the legislature. Solidarity Coalition mobilized people all over the province. So it was a combined effort without working together. It worked out that way.
Is it possible for the NDPers presently in the House to deal on any sane basis with the social credit people presently in the House, when one looks at the abominable shambles that House became, culminating in that nonsense with the rookie speaker dragging Barrett out of the House? Is it possible to have any sanity in that House?
It was suggested to me by one of the senior members of the Social Credit that it's not possible until we get rid of both Barrett and Bennett, that there's too much personal conflict between the two of them. We had to make a change. And I said, well, we're doing our part. Now it's your turn to get rid of your leader, and then there will be some sanity.
Oh, no, I don't want to misinterpret you, but I could say, did you want to get rid of Barrett?
I didn't, Jack, no. I wanted Barrett to be the Premier after that election on May the 5th, very definitely. And I asked Barrett, I invited him, I pleaded with him to carry on for one more time, because I still felt that there's a lot in Dave Barrett.
Yeah, because the choice I've got to be quite...
There isn't a choice. There's no obvious leader, and that's one of the reasons I'm running.
Well, there's this guy Vickers, the bureaucrat, the former deputy minister. He's a man of great compassion and warmth, and worked for a Tory law firm, was at one time
Jack,
a Liberal.
all that aside,
Does he not fit the bill?
Politically, he has yet to prove himself, and I'd like to give him an opportunity. Now,
As a backbencher.
Choose me as leader, and let several of these young people, with a leadership campaign in the offing, perhaps within the next 10 years, and then give them an opportunity to see what they can do in that period. Then maybe there will be an obvious choice. Right now, there isn't one. So let's go with the tried, the true, the tested, the one who has proven that he can do what he says he's going to do.
After the last election, I would have said that the next leader of the NDP was going to be a sacrificial lamb in the next election anyway. I don't think it's quite that now, is it?
I don't think so, and I don't think it was then. We still came out of that with 46% of the
But
vote and a tremendous coalition of everybody voting against us.
You still can't blame Bennett for the world recession, for the slump in lumber markets.
No, but what I can blame Bennett for is what has happened here in the province of British Columbia. The fact that we have done worse in BC than in any other Canadian province. This restraint issue on which he was elected, a pile of garbage. He said to the poorest people in the community, you have to be the ones to pay the cost of getting us out of the recession. Jack, I know people who have given up a lot to fight restraint, poor people. Have you given up anything? Has it cost you anything, the restraint program?
No.
Has it cost the wealthy people in the province anything, really?
No.
But there are people who are getting income tax credits, there are people who are getting rental tax credits, there are people who are doing without the services of the Human Rights Commission, people on welfare have had their allowances cut. These people are being asked to pay the cost of fighting the depression, but not the wealthy.
Yeah, and I'll go along with you. Much of the restraint is just a number scam.
It's garbage, and the Minister of Finance said we've saved $34 million. The expenditures for the year 1984, March 31st, 84, are going to be $34 million less than projected. Was it worth going through all the turmoil that we went through last year to save $34 million out of an $8.6 billion budget?
If you want an answer, I'll give you one. No, it wasn't.
Of course it wasn't. No, the restraint was garbage.
Oh,
it was good politics.
His priorities were all totally wrong.
For $100 million, they could have kept going everything that they stopped. That's all it would have cost, and they were overestimating their deficit by $600 million. So there was plenty of margin there to continue everything that was going on had he not wanted to get revenge on the trade union movement and try to destroy forever the BCGEU in particular and other organizations in general.
Stupich is in orbit this morning. Have a bash at him after the break. In one of Curtis's actions this year, he has taken 70% of all resource revenues, a total of $470 million, at 70%, and is applying it against BCR debt.
Some of which does not come due for another 21 years. It's going to cost us $4 million a month interest. We're borrowing all that money. We're giving it to BCR. What could we do with that $4 million to restore the services that have been cut back?
No, I thought that $470 million came out of $650 million in natural resource revenues budgeted to be received this year.
But we're also proposing to borrow this year some $700 million.
Oh, but that $470 million merely goes into sinking funds in a bank somewhere.
They're going to buy bonds, probably buy bonds from BC Building Corporation, or maybe even BC Hydro bonds. I don't know. They'll buy bonds from some
We don't know what bonds they're going to buy.
They wouldn't tell us. I asked the minister, and he wouldn't tell.
So he's going to take that money out of current revenue.
No, he's going to borrow that money. We're going to be paying interest on it. As taxpayers, we'll be paying interest on that money forever and a day.
But I thought the money came from natural resource revenue.
It does, Jack. So it comes into a pot.
Right.
And out of that pot, we pay out $470.
Right.
But also coming into that pot is some $700 million extra that we're borrowing this year. The $470 will cost us $40 million a year in, or $48 million a year in interest. That's $4 million a month, which would restore the rentalsmen, would restore the Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Branch, would restore all kinds of services.
Did he have to put that $470 million in sinking funds?
He didn't have to give any of it to the BCR. He was committed by BCR statements. There are notes there to the effect that the government is going to pay for the cost of the Tumbler Ridge line completely. They're going to put equity capital into BCR, and those notes are still there. It looks to me as though they're still committed to put another $460 million into BCR for the Tumbler Ridge development.
And that $470 million, he can put those in whatever, they're not in big, wealthy, decent bonds, perhaps. They could be in BC Buildings.
BC Building Corporation, which is using the money to pay for BC Place. Maybe
It's the old WAC
Expo.
Bennett double shuffle.
It's the double shuffle, sure it is. They learned well from WAC Bennett.
What is that? The three, what is it?
The 3 Ps. Yeah,
Yeah, what is that
or
called
the 3
again?
pods, and which one is the
The
P?
shell game.
The shell game, yes.
God, I missed that aspect. I presumed it would go into sinking funds in the New York market or something.
Well.
But that, if he'd kept 100 million of that out, he could have replaced all the cuts.
Could have replaced everything that has been cut since the July 7th budget came down.
Yeah, in the
And that's
form,
not just my word. The UBC professors came up
Mind
with
you-
that figure. Less than 100 million would replace everything that was cut.
many of us do not object to the fact that he has trimmed a novel, heavy civil service.
Jack, even that is fiction. We have dropped 10%. He's talked about 25. The actual numbers show we've gone from 39,000 employees down to 35,000 in 1 year. Now that's a drop of 10%. But even then, I talked to a senior member in one of the ministries recently who is quitting. He can't take it any longer. And he says the shame of the whole thing is that next year they're going to have to go back and start looking for those people, bring them back to work because the work is piling up, is not being done. They're going to have to abandon the restraint program and bring those people back to work to keep the work moving. Now, it's just a temporary thing. It followed the election. And as I say, it's intended to break the BCGEU and other trade unions. Bennett has a hate-on against trade union movement.
He can't break the trade union.
I hope he can't, for the sake of all of us, but he is going to hurt the BCGEU.
Mind you, he is ably assisted in certain occasions by the trade union movement.
Who are fighting a rearguard action trying to save everything they can.
On the wrong ground in many places.
Possibly on the wrong ground. That, that's something they have to decide. Again, you and I can't decide here, and we don't know.
Oh,
at
yeah.
least I don't know enough of the background in each individual situation to say what the trade
Barrett
union movement.
always stayed at arm's length from the BC Fed. I'm the premier of all the people. Do you take the same position, or would the BC Fed become like the BC TUC part of the movement?
Barrett always stayed at arm's length, but he always spoke at their conventions. He was always willing to meet with them, just as he was with representatives of the Employers' Council and even the mining industry if they ever asked for a meeting. And I, as Premier, would do the same thing. I'd be ready to meet with anyone. Certainly, I'd want to cooperate and consult, and if I was going to bring in any legislation that affected the trade union movement, I'd want them to know about it before it hit the papers, as I would the employers. I'd want everybody. That's the way Polly is working in Manitoba.
Okay, calls to Dave Stupich. Go ahead, please.
Oh, yes. I belong to the Hospital Employees Union, and at St. Paul's Hospital and other hospitals, what they've done is they have centralized the laundry facilities out in Abbotsford, I believe, and in hopes to save money, and they haven't built any new or allowed any facilities within the hospitals, some of the hospitals, to process their laundry, and the end result being that they're having trouble in many instances of getting properly clean laundry, and a lot of it has to be sent back. Some of it is...
You're saying St. Paul's is getting dirty laundry from not pristine laundry from a central facility in Abbotsford. Is that what you're saying?
Well, some hospitals are from time to time, and they've centralized this in order to try to, what they say, cut back on expenses and...
Have any of your people lost jobs?
Oh, yeah, they've closed down the laundry, and then what they've done is they've exercised bumping rights, and then, of course, the low man on the totem pole ends up without a job.
David, is there a comment you want to make on that?
Well, it's rampant through the public service. They've even taken the watering of plants in the Parliament buildings and given that to some outside agency, and plants are dying now. They aren't getting the same level of service, and they don't have the control over the independents. They sign a contract with them. They're non-union as a rule. They get whatever service is offered, and then maybe after a year or two's contract, they might discuss the terms of the contract again.
Yeah,
but it's crazy. It's wasting money.
Well,
it's not saving. It's wasting.
Maybe we shouldn't have a BCGEU contract conditions for somebody watering plants.
Members of the union, Jack, and they're certainly not at the pay level that you or I are. But
Go
they're
ahead,
doing
please.
a job, and they're under the control of the administration.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Well, you got a bright one there this morning.
Yeah, very bright.
Isn't he? He's really got me going. At least you know that if the NDP gets in the next time, who's going to start paying? Because he asked you if you have suffered yet. I've been out of work for 10 months now. But what bothers me is that I don't agree with everything that Bill Bennett has done, and he has hurt some people. But at least he's had the guts to do something. But the NDP, they won't even say what they'll do. I'm just loving the idea of the NDP getting in, and we're going to have everything back in this province. And that's a load of bull, because the NDP are not saying anything what they'll do, because they know there's no answer to our problems at this time because of the whole economic situation.
Jack, the Depression is supposed to have started a couple of years ago. In the last 5 years, every one of Curtis's budgets has been a deficit budget, although it hasn't been introduced that way. We have gone into the whole $3.5 billion just to maintain our level of public services, and we aren't maintaining it. We're cutting back. This government has been wasting money over the past 5 years on one election campaign after another, one advertising campaigns to get re-elected, travel expenses to get the ministers out of the country, and I noticed someone said recently the only problem with that is that they bring them back. I was in North Peace, and I said, how could you send a person like Tony Brummett to represent you? And they said, would you rather have him educating your children? Well, I had to accept that answer. $3.5 billion apart from mortgaging every government building except the legislative chamber. That's the first time it's ever happened in the province of British Columbia. We owe money on every public building. They've all been transferred to BC Building Corporation. BC Building Corporation has borrowed money, some of which it's given to BC Place.
On the government building?
On the government building. We sold our ferries, and that's a long-range borrowing, in effect.
And our buses.
Well, yes, but the ferries we're buying back. We've given a contract that we'll buy them back, and moreover, we'll guarantee the person that bought them that if the income tax legislation is changed so that they lose anything at all under this scam, then we'll make it up to them. We guarantee them a profit for 18 years after having sold the ferries to them.
That was the financial companies from whom we're leasing the ferries.
That's right. Well, leasing. We sold them to them, we're buying them back. Yeah, and we guarantee them that they would not lose anything.
If the federal tax rules change, we'll make up any losses
We'll make up any losses, yeah. That's a real sweetheart deal. Now, that's good administration. For 18 years, we're going to be paying off, which is really long-term borrowing.
More with Stupich after the break. Question. If you were back in power tomorrow, would you re-strengthen the ALR and take away all the loopholes that social credit have put into it?
I would certainly take away the appeals to Cabinet. If I were in power and had the authority to do that, I would take away the appeals to Cabinet and leave it in the hands of the Land Commission.
Because there is never pressing danger you feel the way it is now.
There certainly is, of getting to politicians and politicians feeling they owe somebody something and having to meet those debts.
Would you deficit finance to create whatever jobs right now?
In the short term, yes. I believe in the cyclical financing that the Bennett and Curtis talk about but are not practicing because they've been going into debt every year in the last 5 years.
Would you rehire all the civil servants laid off?
We would look at each program by program, reinstitute programs as we felt that we have to prioritize things. We're not going to dive in and do everything at once as we tried to do in '72. But program by program, ministry by ministry, we would start instituting government services or bringing in new ones. Perhaps some of them we would leave out.
What's the shape of the party at the moment? I have something that your finances are in very tough condition.
Our debt right now is almost equivalent to our total revenue for 1 year. It's about $800,000. And I believe if we're going to go to the people of the province and say, look, we're going to manage your affairs, then we have to put our own house in order. And I think we have to clear our own debts first. It means cutting back severely on expenditures at headquarters. It means putting out what we call the pack-rat teams, volunteers who went around the province organizing, bringing in funds, and bringing the head office into touch with the membership generally so that they had a different feeling about that bunch down in headquarters who are running the party.
Are you there for criticizing the Coke machine when you say that?
Jack, I'm not running against anyone. I'm running for leader because I believe I can do the job. And I believe I'm the one person in caucus who would have the support of everyone in caucus if I became leader. If anyone else became leader, I believe there would be antagonisms there that would react against that individual. But I would have nobody against me.
Would you reinstitute the requirement that all government work and subcontracts must be done on a union basis?
Anything paid for with government funds, and there was a few exemptions there, but the same provision that we had in previously, with those exemptions, I would reinstitute that.
That's one of the great schisms between you and social credit, which the public can understand. Social credit said, no, Anybody can apply. Non-union firms can go for any contract. And they cancelled your legislation providing it the other way around.
And all it's doing is bringing down the average standard of living in the whole country, because certainly in times like this, the problem now is not that they're union and anti-union. The problem is that there isn't enough work going on. That's a real difficulty. The economy has died.
Yeah.
The mining industry died in 1975, but at least we kept the economy going. It wasn't the royalty that did it. We never collected a cent of super royalty.
But you scared people half to death.
Listen, there's been more mining leave the province after we left office than left between 1972 and 75 in spite of all that. You look at the figures. Mines closed down one after another.
I know.
After we left office.
I had Zimmerman here the other day with his usual doom and gloom on the market. What we need is some kind of trouble in South America to put the price of domestically produced copper up. That's what we need.
Well, why concentrate so much on copper? And I know what one of my fellow candidates is, but if the world demand is not there for copper right now, that copper, contrary to what Gallardi said once, is not going to rot in the ground. There'll be a day when that copper will be needed in the world. I'm content to let the copper stay there and start looking
What
after
do you
other
say
reserves.
about this report, probably inaccurate from Victoria, that Vickers led the delegates there and you only got 3? He got 70 odd or something.
I haven't seen that particular report, and I concede that right now Vickers is certainly running ahead. He has his crew, his people, have organized certain conventions so that they have picked up more delegates so far than anyone else.
But you've got Nanaimo in your pocket.
I've got Nanaimo. Well, I don't know whether Nanaimo's in my pocket or not. I think I'm in their pocket rather than the other way around. But I will say, Jack, there's just over 8 weeks left of the campaign, including a 2-hour session at the convention, and I'm content to wait and let the delegates choose the one that should lead the party. I believe it should be me, but I'll accept the delegates' decision.
Time for a couple of calls. Go ahead to Dave Stupich.
Yes, I'd just like to make a point here. I've watched your show quite a bit in the last year and a half since I've been off work most of that time, and I think it's the first time you've had a guest on your show that has hit the nail on the head, and that's the part about the people, the not wealthy people paying the price for restraint. And I think that's a very good point. And Mr. Stupich, I think a lot of people are behind you, and you're the man that's going to get that Bennett out of there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should know his name.
Let's do a quickie this morning. It's not fair, but let's try it. Who are you going to vote for? Oh, no, it's dangerous. No, it's dangerous.
I don't mind.
No, you get social creditors phoning up.
Well, it's up to you.
No, it's dangerous. Oh. Go ahead, please.
Yes, isn't your guest the chap that caused the run on the banks, Jack?
No, that was Gary Locke, L-A-U-K, Gary Locke, who made the slight panic about the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. As it happened, if he'd rephrased his remarks a little more discreetly, he'd have got away with his message without trouble. I think that's fair to say.
And it's also fair to say that the Government of Canada rescued all of the banks with respect to that dome situation after that.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Stupich, what guarantees is the NDP party ready to give us that if we put them back in power again, they won't bankrupt our province like they did last time in good times? It sounds to me like they still got the same program they had before, and they're not changing their program. They're going to just bankrupt us again, and this is the worst time in the economy to do it. They're blaming Bennett and everyone else for what's happening in our province economically, but it's actually happening worldwide. Watch any TV and watch any president or prime minister of any country, they've got the same problem. But if you put the NDP back in and they bankrupt the province, what are we going to do then? I'm going to hang up to listen. I want to hear it.
Okay.
That is utter garbage. When we were in office, we reduced the parity bond debt from $260 million down to $125 million because that was instant debt. It could be called at any time. When we left office, there was cash in the bank. There never has been a deficit predicted in the province of British Columbia until year before last, since 1952. So for 30 years, we've gone without predicting a deficit in the province of British Columbia. We've never experienced a deficit until the So-Creds created one in 1976 by giving away $470 million to various Crown corporations. They gave $170 million to ICBC because, according to McGeer, it needed it to pay wages. And the next day, they borrowed back, the same day, they borrowed back $405 million from ICBC, from that same source. We left the province in relatively good shape, although 75 was a tough year. Guarantees, I can only say that we did a good job between 72 and 75. Give us another opportunity, and we'll do a good job again.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. There are two things that have been getting to me, really getting to me. About 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I was watching the noon news, and they had this program or this article on about the government spending about $100 million on old cars for Expo. And that really got to me. I mean, they're spending this on old cars when they could be spending it.
It was sizable. I don't think it was $100 million, but it was one of those things, I suppose.
And the second thing is, now he's saying that he's going to cancel Expo because of these people, these unions and non-unions fighting.
Bennett says that if necessary, if there is union trouble on the Expo site, he'll cancel it. That's true.
Yeah, but he is, I mean, he spent all this money and now he's going to cancel it? That seems stupid. That seems real dumb. And then he calls everybody bad BCers.
That was a bad move by Bennett.
That is kind of ridiculous if you say so.
Yeah, anybody who opposes Bennett apparently is a bad BCer, and that was a very silly move, if I might say so myself. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it was a bad move, but on Expo, I can only say that if he's setting the stage now for abandoning Expo, there must be some problems about Expo about which we're not aware, and he's trying to prepare the people of British Columbia for a possible abandonment of the whole scheme.
What he
Maybe
said,
it isn't selling. I don't know. I know what he said.
It's selling.
But I never have believed Bennett.
Yeah.
He's told so many lies, I just don't believe him. And my concern is that there's something else going wrong, and he's setting the stage to blame it on the trade union movement. I know what he said.
Sounds like a fun one. Dave Stupich has been in rare high form this morning, so the leadership battle on May the 18th?
19th and 20th. We vote on the 20th.
They vote on the 20th. I won't be there to watch it, but I might come over from Salt Springs specially to see what's going to happen that day, I'll tell you. My thanks to Dave Stupich. Next, we're going to go to a controversy in West Vancouver. After a number of reports from irate citizenry of West Vancouver about a proposition you're going to learn about, I sent reporter Mark Schneider to the beach at Ambleside in Tiddly Cove to find out what the worries are.
Jack, this has got to be one of the most beautiful beaches in British Columbia. We're standing in Ambleside Park right now in West Vancouver. There's a group of businessmen, residents of West Vancouver, and representatives of community groups who think that the municipality wants to turn this beautiful beach into one of those disgusting amusement-type beaches in Southern California. We got here Jim Sweeney, Ed McKay, Tom Reid, all representing community groups. Now, let's have it right from the top. What are you afraid of that the Mayor, Derrick Humphreys, wants to do with this property right here?
We're afraid of the foreshore lease that they are going to administrate.
What foreshore lease?
The foreshore lease that the province has extending from here to Sunset Beach, which is 14 miles on the land, on the shoreline, and about 1,000 feet out into the water from the high water mark.
So let me understand properly. There is a water lot and foreshore lease presently held by the provincial government, which West Vancouver wants to take over, which extends out about 1,000 feet and 14 miles that way.
Right.
What's wrong with that?
To take over is to administrate it.
What's wrong with that?
The lease, the way it is drawn up, gives no protection whatsoever to the populace. There is no right. There was no rights of appeal to the government. There was no advertising of the subleasing of the land. There was no market value set. The lease itself was inept.
You think that there's some conspiracy that the municipal hall here is trying to get this property here to do something to develop the property. Is that right? They certainly would have to go through the regular planning process and rezoning to do anything here.
Not the way the original lease was written. They didn't have to, because it was a closed situation. The lease was written and presented to council in January of 1983. It didn't come before the council till December. There was nothing in between. None of the aldermen read or got a copy of the lease. They voted unanimously to put it in. The mayor's words were, "This lease is the greatest thing since sliced bread." One alderman said it's a landmark decision, but none of them had anything to support it.
You know, looking at some of these buildings on the waterfront right here, they're not exactly the nicest places. What's wrong with redeveloping?
The impression that the council had given to the people of West Vancouver, the ordinary ratepayers, those people living in this area, was this was a residential area that they would hope to have, they would start to purchase at great cost to the taxpayers these individual homes on this waterfront, with the idea that it would be parkland eventually.
Did they give you that commitment?
That is the impression they have been giving to everybody. There's semantics of words, which there's a lot of people been arguing about. But the fact is, that most people, you can ask them, anybody, they will say, we thought it was going to be parkland, and our money was spent for that purpose.
Tell me, was
now
there ever a
say,
bylaw that's established this as a park?
No bylaw, no
legislation.
We want that in. That's what we want. We want this portion dedicated.
Okay, next point. Has Mayor Derrick Humphreys, West Vancouver mayor, ever said that he wants to develop this with Big Mac, McDonald's out here?
No.
Has he ever said that?
The situation is...
Has he ever said that? Has he just answered my question? Has he ever said...
The council, we can't say Mayor Humphreys, the council has said there has to be commercial, and that is what they are planning. They will not come out and dedicate it as they said they would in the first place.
In your worst fears, what do you see happening here?
I can see massive marinas going out there, possibly even buildings eventually going outside there, massive crowds of people with inadequate places for the cars to get into. They'll be parking up the streets here into domestic homes, and there'll be a whole change in the character of the municipality, far removed from what people came in this area to live in.
Has the mayor or council ever indicated that they're going to go to this massive redevelopment that you suggest? Have they ever said it?
They have what's called the Ambleside plan. The Ambleside plan is in the City Hall. Have a look at it yourself and you will see.
Has the mayor ever said they're going to redevelop this?
He has presented it.
He has. And you've asked him and he said, yes, we're going to turn this into something that's quite developed. Has he ever said that?
He won't speak for us. He won't be with the ratepayers.
Okay, so we know that that's part of your paranoid fantasy of what's going to happen. There's no basis.
No, it is not a paranoid fantasy. That is not right.
You think it's going to happen. And the mayor has never denied that's going to happen. Is that right?
Well, there are signs that this thing could happen, so put it this way. But the first exercise was to get the control of the foreshore lease in order to do the next stage, if they're going to do this.
Okay.
Now, we can't make accusations of things we have no foundation of actual proof of it, and they're not going to supply any proof if there is such a plan ahead. But the point is the movements are in that direction that seem to be taking a shape.
In other words, this foreshore lease that they're going to take over gives them the power to do it. Is that right?
Exactly.
That's what
power to do it for 30 years.
So the key question to ask the mayor is he going to do it, right?
Yes, is he going to...
The key question to ask the mayor is this: why did the aldermen vote for a 30-year lease that they didn't even read or didn't get a copy of in their envelopes?
Okay, that's one question. Jack, it's obvious we're going to have to go up the hill right now and talk to the mayor and find out what he has planned for down here. You going to come with me?
Yeah, we're with you.
Okay, let's go. Jack, this is where we were standing on the beach with Messrs. Reid and Company. This is a model of the proposed waterfront development in West Vancouver. And here is Mayor Derrick Humphreys of West Vancouver himself. First of all, Mayor Humphreys, I've got to put to you a question that they wanted to know first of all. They claimed that your alderman never even read the lease report for this 30-year lease. True or false?
Well, the aldermen are answerable to that. The lease report was put before them and they've all had it and all had copies. So the lease report has been well known since December.
And if they didn't read it, that's their fault?
Well, they're answerable to that.
Next point. They claim that you have the powers in this foreshore lease, 30-year foreshore lease from the provincial government, where you can turn this thing into one of those disgusting beaches in Southern California. Big McDonald's out on the waterfront, greasy fried, chicken places.
That's the most gross exaggeration that they could do to the dear good people of West Vancouver. Completely wrong.
Well, you tell me. You put me right.
This is a model of the land between 13th Street and 18th Street. For the last 10 years, the municipality has been acquiring some of the land. We now own, including the street ends, about 70% of it. And that has already been reserved for park use.
Right, you promised parks.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be park.
Absolutely.
Well, some of this certainly doesn't look
now,
like park
in this model,
to me.
And there's all the description of possibles for the people to come and give their ideas. None of this is there. Probably none of it will be there. This is the bus depot at the moment. It could be open space, open park all the way through, or it could have a restaurant or a hot dog stand or an ice cream parlor, or it could be just like Rawson Park here, park all the way through.
Tell me if all of this is just a theoretical possibility and
alternatives.
Why scare the natives with this kind of development?
Now, if you read it properly, there's no scaring, it's just what might be possible. Now remember, there's still 30% of this is in private ownership, and we must respect that. And what they can do with it, and what they can do with the municipal land is a matter to be discovered.
Okay, let's talk about the point. Ignore this part. They're concerned about what's going to happen out here. They suggest that you have now the powers, if you get this lease through, where you can put in pilings and build condominiums out on the waterfront, high-rises on the waterfront, more marinas, 18 miles down the beach.
It's just a bunch of scare tactics. It's just a bunch of scare tactics. In no way would West Vancouver, either this council, future councils, or the people want to do that at all.
Let me get you on the record. You are going to stake your political career on the line to maintain this water here as water. You will not be redeveloping this out here at all.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right. And not only that...
No houses on stilts, no roller coasters out there.
Over my dead body, and that's as false a claim that anybody could dream up this week.
Well, it seems I set the cat among the pigeons yesterday when I talked about Tronquil and gave my breakdown of in which I was in possession of the kinds and types of patients in that institution. And I have been deluged by complaints about my attitude from all kinds of people in the BCAMR. So be it. Next Thursday, going to have Grace McCarthy here to spell out what's going to happen to Tronquil and the patients presently in it. And also Lois Halstead of the BCAMR from Kamloops. That's the best way to tackle it. Oh, by the way, there's nothing new from the Supreme Court yet on the contempt hearing presently in front of Chief Justice Alan McKay, so we'll have a few minutes for a free for everyone. Go ahead, please. Oh, you hung up on me. Some people take fright, you know. Maybe I bark. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'm just making a comment about the West Vancouver mayor. I've been living in North Vancouver for several years now, and I've been just watching the political movements of Humphreys and others. And I just find it funny because he made a comment not too long ago, and he was quoted as saying about the land that the Indians have been reallocated because of the...
Yes.
Anyway, the comment is that he made the comment that he was going to... it's just about negotiate, that he was going to have the property back. And then the Indian leader was also, the band leader was also quoted as saying...
Matthias was very hesitant about the possibility of leasing back Ambleside to West Vancouver. Mayor Humphreys hopes to have talks on the subject. The legalities, however, of who owns the land have been settled.
Yes, but he still seems a bit wary about the fact that he might not get it, but he's telling everybody that he seems to have it in the clutch of his hand.
Well, that's a nuance. Derrick Humphreys, he's not a bad guy. He's in a very tough position. It wasn't he who gave the land back to the Indians.
No, it's the federal government.
And I don't think he was even involved in the negotiations on giving the land back to the Indians, but I'm not sure. That was an interesting little thing this morning because Tom Reid, who was the tall guy in Schneider's report, I think he ran for West Vancouver Council, if not for Mayor of West Vancouver recently.
Right, but the thing is that if Humphrey says that, well, he'll still stake his political career on the fact that this won't go in. But the thing is, does not the council have the ability to, if they vote all in favor of something, that it goes past the mayor altogether?
Are you talking about the development on the waterfront?
Correct.
Well, no, it's got to be mayor and council. That's all. That's quite obvious. Mark Schneider.
Hello, Jack.
Are you down at the hearing?
I'm at the courthouse right now, Jack. I've just stepped out briefly to tell you what's going on.
Has it started yet?
The proceedings started about 25 minutes ago, and so far Peter Gall, representing Kirchhoff Construction, has been making his argument so far.
And his arguments are simply that that those who don't go are guilty of contempt?
Jack, he's pulled a very neat finesse here today that's interested Chief Justice McKay. He says he's going to prove that the two parties, that is the BC and Yukon Building Trades and the Carpenters Union, have orchestrated the entire affair by inciting the breaches of the court order. But he says that he wants fines, but he hopes that the Chief Justice will delay those fines to give the unions an opportunity to pull the pickets in the next 2 days. If the pickets are pulled, then presumably there would be no fines. That's what's happened so far.
Okay, and who's appearing for the... are the union officials in court?
No union officials that I can see, Jack, but it's your old friend Harry Rankin, who's representing BC and Yukon Building Trades.
Oh, he'll give them a good proposition, I'll tell you. Okay, anything else?
No, that's it. I'm going to go back in, and if anything happens, I'll give you a call.
How come you're down there on the telephone when you were on the beach in West Vancouver and Ambleside not 3-4 minutes ago?
Jack, it's one of the magic items of our business.
Yeah, try and get straight back to the office, will you?
Right away, Jack.
Lots of work to do today. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack. As far as penny farthing is concerned, just proves that... Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, just as far as penny farthing is concerned, just goes to prove as far as BC is concerned, we're still the home of the Braves and land of the Frees. Anyway, back to West Vancouver, I figure that these people are a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys playing the pot, calling the kettle black. I mean, I grew up out there, saw the machinery tear down the forest, put through the upper levels highway when I was a kid, tear down the residential Ambleside area, put up the towers, brought in people. This all brought a community, a different community to West Vancouver. I'd like to see it go back to the way it was before. These guys, it seems to me, they're scared to look around the corner because they're scared of what might be around the corner. I think it would be a hell of an idea to have this thing out there as long as they keep a virgin shoreline. I'm for that, but I'm for the development.
Here, thank you very much, old boy.
Thank you.
I seldom do programs about places where I live. Keeps me out of trouble. I get in trouble enough. Did you finish the break? Take it away then. Tomorrow we have a high-power forum on all aspects of sexual abuse, this explosion of public awareness. Do join us for that tomorrow morning. Some good experts coming too. And I'll be there at 9 a.m. precisely.